Hey everyone, I'm so glad you're here. Please like and subscribe to the channel to give me more motivation to tell more interesting stories. Now, let's begin. You grow up learning that names matter more than truth. Not your name, not what your mother whispers when she holds your face between her palms. No, the other name, the one stamped on your ID card, Hutu or Tutsi, or sometimes Twa, if you're someone the world doesn't talk about at all. At first, it's just a word, something in the background, a syllable passed down like soup recipes and superstitions, but then school starts, and you're told who gets to sit in the front, who gets fewer pencils, who's more Rwandan, and who isn't. A mainstream historical fact: Belgium, during its colonial rule over Rwanda, institutionalized ethnic divisions by issuing identity cards classifying people as Hutu, Tutsi, or Twa. These categories were often based on arbitrary traits like cattle ownership or nose shape, cementing societal divisions. You watch your teacher recite history like it's carved in stone. You learn the Tutsis once ruled, that the Hutus rose up, that justice was overdue. But no one mentions nuance. No one says the lines were once blurred, marriages once mixed, or how identity had once meant community, not category. Your father lowers his voice when the radio is on. Your uncle stops talking politics. Your mother tells you not to ask questions, especially in public. Still the questions simmer. Why are your neighbors suddenly cautious around one another? Why did your friend disappear from school after someone read his last name aloud in class? Why does the market feel heavier even when your arms are empty? A quirky tidbit: the colonial administration in Rwanda used anthropometric measurements like skull size and nose width to assign ethnic identities. These pseudoscientific methods became the foundation for deep social and political divisions. You try to ignore the tension. You try to focus on homework. You try to be a child. But then there's a meeting at your school, and someone reads a list of names, and someone else nods, and you notice it's always the same kind of name. Historians still argue whether the genocide was years in the making or ignited solely by political collapse. But anyone who lived through the 1980s knows this. The hate was being built brick by brick, not in the dark, but in broad daylight. You hear whispers about militias training in the hills, about weapons being distributed, about lists being copied, laminated, shared. But the radio plays music. The church bells still ring. And so everyone pretends. You pretend too. Until one day, when you're out buying flour, a soldier walks past you and your spine goes cold. He doesn't look at you. He reads you as if your face were a map of history and betrayal. You say nothing, because you know peace is no longer peace. It's just a silence waiting to break. You hear the explosion before you see the sky turn orange, a crack like thunder, then sirens, then silence, then the screams. It's April 6, 1994. A plane falls from the sky just outside Kigali. The president, Juvenal Habyarimana, is aboard. And in an instant, the world you knew dies in the fire that consumes the wreckage. They say the plane was shot down. They say it was an accident. They say it was the rebels. They say it was an inside job. Historians still argue who pulled the trigger. But to you, none of that matters. Because the real explosion doesn't come from the sky. It comes from the streets. The moment the president dies, the masks come off. Roadblocks appear like weeds. Militias pour into neighborhoods with machetes, radios, and written orders. And the word Tutsi becomes a death sentence. You stay up all night, lights off, heart sprinting in place. Someone knocks at the door. You don't move. They don't knock again. Your father's face changes. Not his features, his soul. His calm is gone. His voice a whisper. He digs in the garden at night, buries papers, burns photos. You ask him why. He says, because we might not come back. You want to ask what that means, but you don't, because you already know. A mainstream historical fact. Within hours of the president's assassination, government-aligned militias known as the Interahamwe began targeted killings of Tutsis and moderate Hutus. The genocide did not begin days later. It began that very night. And the radio sings. Yes, sings. Not warnings, not condolences, but names, lists, broadcasts of who to kill, where they live, what they look like, with DJs laughing between announcements. A quirky tidbit. Radio Télévision. Libre de Mille Collines, RTLM, was the hate-fueled station that blended pop music with real-time kill orders. Their announcers became celebrities, their words weapons. You peek through the curtains and see your neighbors with clubs, not police, not rebels, neighbors. You grew up with them. You shared food. They once lent you salt, and now they hold machetes. They don't look angry, they look certain. Because when certainty replaces thought, blood follows. You gather what you can. You don't take much. You can't. Bags make you look like you're leaving, and anyone trying to leave is guilty. So you stay and wait and listen. Every knock, every shout, every creak of the gate feels like the end. And still you stay. Because stepping outside is a gamble you don't know how to win. One by one, houses fall silent. Not from peace, but from absence. People vanish. Families vanish. Entire blocks go still. You see smoke rise from across the road, and you wonder if that's a body or just memory burning away. The ground feels like it's shifting beneath you, and the silence, it thickens. It grows teeth. It waits. Because the genocide has begun, and the world, still watching, still waiting, still pretending this isn't happening. But you're wide awake. You're lying in bed when the sky cracks open. It's not thunder, not fireworks. It's the sound of a plane falling fast, loud and final. You sit up. You hold your breath. You listen for screams. Then you hear the radio. The voice says President Habyarimana's plane has been shot down. You don't fully understand what that means, but you feel the shift like the air has lost its rhythm. Before sunrise, the streets are already different. Shutters close. Whispers rise. And in the silence, something darker begins to move. You peer through the curtains and see soldiers at corners. Neighbors who smiled yesterday now walk with their heads low, their footsteps quicker than usual. Then the voices come again from the radio. Cut the tall trees. That phrase, it loops, over and over. You don't know it's a coded message at first, but soon you understand. A mainstream historical fact. On April 6, 1994, President Juvenal Habyarimana's plane was shot down over Kigali, triggering the Rwandan Genocide. Within hours, militias, soldiers, and civilians began targeting Tutsis and moderate Hutus across the country. The radio is no longer a source of news. It's a weapon. RTLM. The so-called hate radio blasts out names, locations, instructions. You're told to listen closely. and to act. You don't, but others do. A quirky tidbit. Some of the RTLM broadcasters were once comedians and entertainers. Their familiar voices made the propaganda seem casual, almost humorous, until it turned deadly. The killings begin so fast you can't believe it's real. Men in civilian clothes, armed with machetes, clubs, and homemade weapons, start going door to door. You see a neighbor you've known since childhood, dragged into the street. No trial, no accusation, just identity. You want to run, but where? Every street has a checkpoint. Every house could be a trap. Even churches' places that once offered safety now lock their doors from the inside. Historians still argue who shot down the plane Hutu extremists or the Rwandan Patriotic Front. But to the people on the ground, the truth barely matters. The result is the same. Hell has arrived. The first week feels like a blur. You stay low. You don't breathe unless you must. You learn to make no sound when you cry. And above it all, the radio plays on. Music, names, laughter, and orders. Do your work, they say. Finish the job. You want to believe someone will stop this. That the UN will intervene. That France, Belgium, America, anyone will step in. But no one does. You are on your own. And the silence from the world is louder than the machetes. You stay in the shadows. You hope your name hasn't been copied onto any list. You pray that those who knew your father won't tell anyone what they knew. But prayers in this place are not shields. They are whispers that the blood drowns out. You keep the radio low now, not off, just low enough that the words don't feel like commands. You can't tear your ears away. It's like watching a fire burn your home and still hoping to hear your name not spoken in the flames. The cockroaches must be eliminated. You've heard that line 3 times this hour. They don't say Tutsi anymore. They say Inyenzi, cockroach. It's easier to kill a cockroach than a neighbor. That's the point. A mainstream historical fact: during the genocide, the Rwandan government and its propaganda arms referred to Tutsis as Inyenzi, dehumanizing language meant to justify mass extermination. The broadcasts give exact instructions, names, where people live, what they drive, which houses have been missed. The Interahamwe, the militia listen, and they move quickly. You see them on the street, drunk, with hate weapons in hand, singing the songs about cleansing Rwanda. Some are barely older than you. Some used to beg outside your school. Now they're in charge. They wear banana leaf armbands and wield machetes as if born with them. Their eyes don't blink much anymore. They carry whistles and lists. If they knock on your door, they're not asking for sugar. They're asking for death. You stay hidden. You barely breathe. You chew raw cassava in silence. You don't flush toilets. You don't light candles. You live like a ghost, hoping to stay that way. A quirky or fringe tidbit. Some Rwandans stuff blankets into their water pipes to avoid the noise of flushing being heard by militias searching buildings. Every sound could cost you your life, but sound finds you anyway. Outside your window, you hear screams. Not once. Repeatedly. A woman, a child, a voice that cracks, then ends. You try not to imagine, but your mind doesn't listen. And always, the radio continues. Finish the job. Work fast. They are hiding. Historians still argue whether RTLM was an instrument of genocide or the match that lit the fire. But to you, it's the devil's favorite mixtape, blending jokes, jingles, and death like some cruel DJ set from hell. Sometimes you hear names you recognize. Your school teacher, your cousin's best friend, a woman who once sold you mangoes for half price. They're not names anymore. They're targets. Every broadcast feels like a lottery you don't want to win. The fear twists your stomach. You haven't eaten in 2 days. The baby next door stopped crying. That silence feels worse. You wonder what makes someone pick up a machete and walk toward a friend. You wonder what would happen if you were handed one. You wonder how long before someone decides you're next. You once believed your home was safe, that no matter what happened outside, the four walls around you would protect you like arms in the dark. That belief lasted about a week, maybe less. Now, every knock sounds like death wearing shoes. The front door creaks louder than usual. The window, always a bit loose, now feels like an invitation. And the shadows, they stretch longer than they should, as if they know something you don't. One morning you hear footsteps. 3 pairs. 2 laughing. 1 dragging something, maybe a machete, maybe not. You don't check. You crouch behind a cabinet, squeezing into corners that haven't seen sunlight in years. You hold your breath. You hold your name inside your mouth like a secret. They pass. This time. But you know they'll come back. A mainstream historical fact: during the genocide, killers often returned to houses they'd already searched. Survivors who stayed hidden lived with the constant terror that being missed once just meant the danger was delayed, not gone. You stare at the door for hours. Then you decide you have to leave. Your house is no longer a home. It's a coffin waiting to close. You wrap a cloth around your face, not to hide, but to keep from inhaling the stench that's begun to seep into the streets. You step over bodies. Not far from your garden gate, you see your neighbor's red bicycle on its side, a sandal stuck in the spokes. You can't tell who it belonged to. You don't want to know. A quirky tidbit. Some survivors escape detection by hiding in ceilings, floorboards, or even septic pits. One woman survived in a latrine for 76 days, breathing through cracks in the wood. You head to a friend's house. She's Hutu, a good person. She used to braid your sister's hair on weekends. She opens the door, eyes wide. Her voice trembles, not out of fear for you, but of what sheltering you means. "I'll hide you," she says, "but only for a night." That night turns into 2, then 3. You sleep behind sacks of beans. You hear her whisper to her husband, "We can't keep her here." You know it's true. On the 5th night, someone knocks. Too hard, too familiar. She doesn't open the door, but the next morning she brings you food and says nothing. You leave before sunset. You wander. From house to house, from friend to cousin to stranger. Each time, the answer grows colder. You can't stay. Historians still argue whether the neighbors who turned people away were afraid or complicit. Some say they feared for their children. Others say they feared being labeled traitors. The lines between victim bystander and perpetrator were often as thin as a breath. You start sleeping in banana groves, in drainage ditches, in churchyards where even God seems to have packed up and left. You begin to feel less like a person and more like a rumor. Something half seen, half forgotten. Something not meant to last. But still, you keep moving because something inside you still whispers, if you stop, you disappear. You used to think roads were for walking. Now, they're for dying. Each one you cross feels like a test, not of faith or fate of identity. At every turn, there's a roadblock, a table, a rope, a pile of tires, and behind it, a group of men with weapons and notebooks. They call it checking papers, but what they're really checking is who should still be alive. You approach the first one slowly. You've been coached. Keep your voice low. Avoid eye contact. Say your name like it doesn't matter, but it does. Because that name, it's not just letters. It's a verdict, a mainstream historical fact. During the genocide, thousands of checkpoints were set up across Rwanda. Militias and civilians used ID cards issued by the state to identify Tutsis. A name alone could mean instant execution. The man at the roadblock asks your name. You give it. He narrows his eyes, flips through a notebook, looks back at you. You feel your knees go soft. You remember your mother's face. Then he waves you through. You don't ask why. You don't breathe until you're 4 streets away. Maybe your name was misspelled. Maybe you were lucky. Maybe he just didn't care that day. But the next checkpoint, you're not so sure. A friend told you to memorize a Hutu family name. Another told you to carry a photograph of a soldier. Say he's your brother. Another said, just cry. Sometimes they let the loud ones live. You try all 3 at different times. You don't even recognize your voice anymore. A quirky tidbit. Some survivors faked accents, claimed adoption by Hutu families, or even carried children not their own to appear normal. Every detail mattered. One man survived by pretending to be a deaf mute. He stayed silent for 3 months. Every checkpoint is a lottery with blood-stained tickets. Sometimes you hear screams from the back of a truck. Sometimes you hear laughter. Sometimes you wonder which sound is worse. Historians still argue how many people participated at the roadblocks. Some say thousands. Others argue the number was inflated to spread blame. But for you, the exact number doesn't matter. What matters is this: no one was just passing by. You begin walking only at night. You study which gates open easily. You count the cracks in fences. You avoid places with lights because light doesn't mean safety. It just means you're visible, and visibility is danger. You see people stripped of their clothes, their names, their futures right in the middle of the road. Some beg, some pray, some go quiet. You don't stop for any of them. You can't, because mercy is now just another way to get killed. You reach the church by dawn. The wooden doors are already open. Inside, it smells like sweat and fear and incense that can't hide either. You used to believe churches were sacred. Now they're just buildings, walls and roofs, and betrayal under stained glass. There are hundreds of people packed into the pews, the aisles, the corners, some praying, some whispering, some just staring straight ahead as if God might appear if they stay still long enough. You slide into a shadow and sit beside a woman holding 3 children, none of them hers. You don't ask where their parents are. She doesn't ask your name. You listen to the wind rattle the windows. You think of home. You think of your father's voice. You think of whether he made it to the other side of town, or if he's now just another silence that no one explains. A mainstream historical fact. In 1994, many Tutsis fled to churches and mission schools believing they would be safe. Tragically, some priests and clergy collaborated with militias, revealing hiding places or actively assisting in the massacres. By midday, word spreads, they're coming. The church doors close, but not fast enough. There's no time to pray, just time to choose run, hide, or wait. You run through the back corridor, past crumbling stone walls, into the banana trees. You trip. You bleed. You keep going. You hear gunfire, then machetes. Not their metal, their rhythm. A terrible music you'll never unhear. You spend that night curled under an overturned wheelbarrow, listening to people scream your name. Not friends, not family, killers. They have a list. You are on it. A quirky tidbit. In some places, people carved hiding holes into church altars or buried themselves beneath rice sacks in church storerooms. One survivor lived under floorboards for 58 days, guided only by the sound of church bells. You don't eat for 2 days. You drink from a muddy puddle behind an abandoned classroom. You share it with a frog. You thank it for not croaking too loudly. Historians still argue why some churches became death traps. Was it ideology? Was it fear? Was it convenience? But to you, none of that matters. What matters is the memory, the cross above the altar, the stained glass shattering, the priest turning his back, the silence after. You escape only because the killers were distracted by a truck driving by. They chase the engine. You chase your breath. You run until your legs forget how to stop. When you do, you're not sure if you're still alive or just one of the forgotten. But you keep walking. Because the only thing more terrifying than moving is stopping. You see them before they see you. Blue helmets, white trucks, the letters UN scrawled across metal doors like hope painted in block letters. You blink twice. You're not hallucinating. It's real. The United Nations is here, and for the first time in what feels like years, your knees almost give out, not from terror, but from relief. You want to run to them, arms raised, voice cracking. You want to shout your name, tell them who you are, beg them to make it stop, but you don't, because there's something strange in the way they stand. They aren't rushing. They aren't shouting commands or building barricades. They're just watching. You creep closer, hiding behind a broken brick wall, and you realize they're not here to fight. They're here to observe. A mainstream historical fact: the UN peacekeeping mission in Rwanda at the time, UNAMIR, had strict orders not to intervene militarily in the genocide. Troops were only allowed to protect designated safe zones and were forbidden from using force to stop killings. You see a woman screaming at a soldier dragging her child by the wrist, begging him to let her inside the compound. He doesn't move. The gate stays shut. The child's face presses against the bars, and for a second you lock eyes. You both understand. Help is right there, but also impossibly far away. A quirky tidbit: some UNC and peacekeepers left Rwanda as the violence escalated, especially after 10 Belgian soldiers were killed. Their withdrawal left large areas unprotected, and in some places, survivors were told, "You're on your own." You spend 2 nights sleeping near a UN post, hoping for a change of heart. It never comes. One guard hands you a bottle of water through the fence. He doesn't look you in the eye. You whisper thank you anyway, because dignity is all you have left. Historians still argue whether the UN's failure was one of bureaucracy, racism, or fear. Some say their hands were tied. Others say they never tried to untie them. You stop believing anyone is coming to help. You stop looking for uniforms. You stop listening for helicopters. You stop hoping the world will notice. Instead, you focus on small victories: a stream that isn't poisoned, a mango tree with fruit still growing, a stranger who doesn't report you. You survive by shrinking, by staying invisible, by becoming nothing. And yet, even in this invisibility, this quiet, unremarkable form of resistance, you are still here, breathing, moving, waiting for something to break. You stop counting the days, not because you've forgotten how, but because numbers mean nothing when every hour feels like an eternity and every minute is borrowed. But then one morning, you hear something new. Not the drone of radio hate, not the thud of footsteps, not the screams. Gunfire, yes, but different. Not random, not drunk, not celebratory. Organized. You crawl toward a wall and peek through a crack in the bricks. Soldiers. Different uniforms. Different posture. They're not searching for victims. They're advancing. You don't know it yet, but it's the Rwandan Patriotic Front, the RPF. A mainstream historical fact, the Rwandan Patriotic Front, led by Paul Kagame, launched an offensive during the genocide and slowly gained control of the country, halting the mass killings by mid-July 1994. They were largely composed of Tutsi refugees from Uganda and neighboring nations. They move with purpose. They fire back. They don't pause for roadblocks. They don't smile. You stay hidden, but you watch. And somewhere deep inside, hope stirs not like a flame, but like a coal that refuses to go cold. It takes weeks. They don't sweep in all at once. They inch forward, city by city, village by village. Each victory smells like gunpowder blood and possibility, a quirky tidbit. In some towns, survivors painted white bed sheets on rooftops or waved shirts tied to sticks to signal they were still alive. RPF soldiers were told to look for any sign of movement and tread carefully around structures that might hold survivors. You hear rumors from other survivors in hiding. The North is secure. They've taken Kigali. It's almost over. But what does over even mean? Does it mean you can sleep indoors again? Does it mean your name is safe to say out loud? Does it mean you can ask about your family without bracing for silence? Historians still argue about the RPF's role, not just in ending the genocide, but in what came after. There are whispers of retaliation, disappearances, justice with jagged edges. But right now, all you know is this: the men with machetes are retreating. The roadblocks are burning. The hate-filled voices on the radio are going quiet. You step out from the trees, barefoot, thinner than you've ever been, eyes darting like a feral animal. And you walk, not toward home, because you no longer know where that is, but toward people. And that's something. You pass bodies that no one has buried. You pass homes that no one will live in again. You pass children holding empty cans, waiting for someone to tell them it's okay to eat. And when the RPF soldiers see you, they don't shout. They don't aim their rifles. They nod. And for the first time in over 100 days, you don't feel like prey. Just a person again. You wake up not from a nightmare, but from silence. That's how you know the genocide is over. Not because someone declared it, not because peace was signed, but because there's finally a night where nothing screams. No bullets, no radio static, no whispered names turned into death sentences, just wind and breath and the thrum of a world trying to remember how to be alive. You walk down a road that used to be a massacre site. It now has footsteps, not blood. A woman stirs a pot in front of a shell of a house. A boy pushes a tire with a stick. Someone is hammering wood building something. A mainstream historical fact. The RPF declared victory in July 1994. After the genocide ended, nearly 2 million Hutus, some fearing retaliation, some guilty of participation, fled to neighboring countries. Rwanda began the arduous process of recovery. But recovery doesn't mean relief. You meet people who survived, but not all of them escaped. Some wear fresh scars. Some wear haunted eyes. Some just sit staring at walls that saw too much. You don't talk much at first. Words feel heavy. The last time you used them, someone died. Still, you hear stories of women giving birth in swamps, of children who lived alone in attics, of babies pulled from mass graves still breathing. And you wonder how the world didn't stop spinning. A quirky tidbit. In the months following the genocide, survivors set up makeshift counseling centers in open fields and classrooms. People shared stories under trees. Sometimes they wept. Sometimes they just sat in silence. But the act of gathering itself was revolutionary. One day, a list is posted in the town square. It's not a kill list. It's a reunification list. Names of the living scrawled by hand. You stare at it, tracing each line like it's scripture. And there your brother, not dead, not gone. You run until your legs wobble. You find him thinner, older eyes, sunken, but alive. He doesn't speak at first. Neither do you. But when your foreheads touch and your arms wrap around bone and breath and grief, you know this. You are both still here. Historians still argue whether true reconciliation can exist after genocide. Some say Rwanda is a model of healing. Others say it's healing on the surface, still bleeding underneath. You don't know the answer, but you know this. Your name survived. Your story didn't end in the dirt. And even if the world turned away, you didn't disappear. You stand in a line outside a courthouse that used to be a school. There are no wigs, no robes, no gavels, just plastic chairs, paper records, and men who once hid behind walls. They call it Gakaka justice born from community, or at least what's left of it. You sit in the sun, blinking, trying not to tremble, as a man you once knew as a shopkeeper stands and confesses to murder. He lists the names, the tools, the location. There is no hesitation in his voice, only exhaustion. A mainstream historical fact. The Gakaka court system was created in post-genocide Rwanda to deal with the massive number of perpetrators, over 1 million cases. It was a community-based justice model designed for truth-telling confession and reconciliation. You wait for someone to shout, for someone to lunge, for a wave of rage to rip through the crowd like a returning tide, but it doesn't come. Instead, an old woman claps her hands. Not applause, just a sound. A final punctuation mark. The judge, your old math teacher, nods. Case closed. You look around and wonder who is still pretending. Who is guilty? Who is innocent? Who can tell the difference anymore? A quirky tidbit. Some Gakaka trials lasted only a few hours, with entire communities serving as both jury and witness. Occasionally, a cow was offered in place of a prison sentence as symbolic reparation. Some survivors accepted. Others walked away. You testify eventually. Your voice cracks. You forget dates. You forget what you buried and what you imagined. But you tell your story, and someone writes it down, and someone else nods. And that's how you know it matters. Historians still argue whether Gakaka brought justice or simply painted over pain. Some call it a miracle. Others call it a mask. You call it something else. Survival with accountability. You walk home after the trial with a strange ache in your chest. Not grief, not rage. Relief, because now it's real. It's said. It's written. It's no longer just inside you, gnawing from the inside out. You pass a child drawing in the dirt with a stick. They don't know what the word genocide means. And maybe for the first time, that's a blessing. You step into your house. It has no roof, but it has walls. You sweep. You light a candle. You breathe. And when the candle flickers, you don't flinch, because you're not in hiding anymore. You're healing. You walk through Kigali, and it almost feels like any other city. Cars honk, vendors shout, children in uniforms chase soccer balls through alleys. If you didn't know, you'd think this was a normal place, a place untouched. But you do know. You always know. Because even beneath the pavement, the roots of memory twist and crawl. You visit a memorial, not because someone tells you to, not because it's assigned, but because you owe it to those who never got to leave their hiding places. A mainstream historical fact. The Kigali Genocide Memorial holds the remains of over 250,000 victims. It's not just a museum. It's a mass grave, a classroom, and a sacred space. Survivors, locals, and tourists walk its halls each day, searching for understanding. You walk slowly. You read names etched in stone. You see the photos, school portraits, weddings, toddlers holding balloons. Some of them look like your cousin. One looks almost exactly like your sister. You whisper her name. The walls don't answer, but somehow you feel heard. You light a candle. You let yourself cry. Not like before, not hidden, not in silence. You let the tears fall where the world can see them. A quirky tidbit. In some rural towns, survivors built memorials from scrap metal and broken tools, literal ruins turned into monuments. In one village, a church's collapsed roof was preserved as is, with shoes left behind still resting beneath the pews. Later, you ride a bus past new buildings, glass towers, and gardens. There's Wi-Fi now, smartphones, coffee shops, but you still flinch when someone raises their voice. Still scan faces for the ones you recognize from either side. Rwanda looks forward. You do too, but never blindly. Historians still argue how Rwanda rebuilt so quickly. Some praise its discipline and progress. Others critique its silences and restrictions. Maybe both are true. You know this. You are not the same. But you are still here. And in the silence that remains, there is now room for breath. Room for music. Room for stories. Even if the world was quiet when you needed it most. You aren't quiet anymore. You write, you speak, you remember. And in doing so, you make sure someone else won't be forgotten. The candle flickers beside your bed again. This time, you let it. No hiding. No rushing to snuff it out. No fear that the glow might invite eyes in the dark. Because now, even if the night returns, you know how to survive it. The world moves on slowly. Not with loud celebrations or sweeping gestures, but with quiet choices. Someone plants beans in a field where bodies once lay. A teacher reads a poem in a classroom built from war ash bricks. A child asks what happened, and someone finally answers. You walk the streets of Kigali with worn shoes and steady steps. You pause near the memorial, just for a moment. Not out of habit, not out of pain, but to remind yourself you still feel. You still remember. And you remember for those who cannot. The silence doesn't scare you anymore. It speaks. It says you lived. It says you endured. It says you matter. There will be days when memories crawl from the corners of your mind uninvited. There will be nights when you wake gasping from dreams soaked in history, and that's okay. Healing doesn't erase what happened. It just softens the edges enough to hold. So tonight, let the candle stay lit. Let your story echo. Let your voice shaken, though it may be, join the chorus of those who refuse to forget. And as the stars blink overhead and the winds hum softly through the hills, let the final whisper be yours. You were there, you survived, you remember, and now you are heard. Thank you for listening to the story.